I don't walk out of movies, and I didn't walk out of this one, but it's the first time in quite a few years where I was sitting in the cinema and I was very, very tempted.
Okay, we are back to the films, and we're looking ahead here. It's a film I have not seen yet, but I think this one could be a little bit divisive amongst the team. This is Jonathan Glazer's Zone of Interest. Scott, do you want to introduce this to us?
Okay, so Zone of Interest sees a Nazi commandant and his family living next door to the Auschwitz concentration camp. Here's a clip.
Who's going to start? Let's start with Andy, I think, on the Zone of Interest.
Well, I want to preface my comments on this by saying I've been to Auschwitz on a number of occasions, at least half a dozen times. And always one of the more shocking sights is the lovely house across the way from the fence, behind which is gas chamber number 1. It's got a nice white picket fence around it, nice curtains, everything else, a big garden at the back. And I found it an absolutely horrific sight. I mean, it's not when you stand in gas chamber number 1, which we see at the end of the film, which is the only gas chamber left standing. That is obviously horrific. When you see the displays, which we see at the end of the film, all the shoes, thousands of shoes in glass cabinet, thousands of suitcases. What they don't show in the film is there's one glass cabinet with 5,000 scalps in it that's still got ponytails with ribbons in. So there are signs when you walk around Auschwitz that say, do not talk, keep silent. And you don't feel like talking when you're walking around there, believe me. And if any of you have been, you'll know what I mean. So to see the domestic bliss in which the commandant and his family were living just across the road is horrifying to see this. And this film, I think, brilliantly for me, just by use of sound, just by use of the odd shot of the chimney churning out the cremated ashes of the dead bodies, is horrific in its own way. So it's as horrific as seeing anything going on in the camp, because it portrays the coldness, the brutality, the inhumanity of those that were perpetrating the crimes. And while people are dying, we just over the other side of the garden fence, the commandant and his family and friends are picnicking and partying. And I think this film based on Martin Amis' novel, does an absolutely brilliant job of showing a side of Auschwitz that has never been seen before, but which is absolutely historically accurate. There's one scene where a little boy is playing upstairs in his bedroom with his cars, and we hear the sound through his bedroom window of a Jewish prisoner being shot and screaming and then being shot, and the little boy just carries on playing as if this is normal everyday life, normal everyday, which it was. So I found the film as horrific as The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas. I found it as horrific as Schindler's List. I found it as horrific as Son of Saul. Not because it shows what's actually happening in the camp. It doesn't. That's only by the use of sound and just the odd visual as the camera pans up over the garden fence. But because it shows the sheer inhumanity, the sheer callousness. I mean, we saw in that trailer Rudolph Hess's wife wearing a fur coat, which is one of the things that had been taken off one of the prisoners, and she's wearing it and doesn't think anything of it. And they're even throwing away stuff, that they've taken off prisoners because it's not up to one scratch or whatever. I thought this film was brutal. I thought it was horrific in its own particular way, without showing us what was happening in the camp, but showing us what was happening outside with those perpetrating the crime.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a fan of the director's previous film, Under the Skin. I know some people are going to say this is a bit slow. This is a bit. I mean, we open on a black screen with a somber overture for 2 or 3 minutes at least. So it's an acquired taste, I think, the film. But I think the film is an important film because in its own way it demonstrates the inhumanity, the cruelty, the brutality, the sheer evil that was happening in the camp while those perpetrating it partied and picnicked. Mm-hmm. So for me, this was an important film, horrific film, and I think a necessary film.
Okay. Scott.
So, some people, I'm one of those some people. This film, I was really looking forward to it. I thought the trailer looked interesting, and it's the kind of subject matter where I really enjoy that sort of World War II history. From that opening shot that Andy mentioned, we get in, the film's way to start, and then it's just a black screen for however many, 2, 3, 4, whatever minutes with the music playing, and I'm already sitting in my seat going, get on with it. Come on, let's start the movie, please. And I was like, okay, this is just dragging and dragging. It reminded me a little bit like Roma, where at the start, it's just that opening shot and it just like, stop it. Just get the movie beginning. And then even as it begins, this movie is so much just long, drawn out shots of people doing ordinary things, really nothing happening for the vast majority of this film. We watch people cleaning or eating or sleeping, and it's just this camera shot held on them. Yes, there might be some creative sound design here and there, but it's so boring, and I'm going to use a word that will upset some people. I think it's a bit pretentious. At the same time, Jonathan Glazer, I was not a fan of Under the Skin, despite being set in Scotland. He's a very strange director. He does make weird movies, and he's not ashamed of the fact that he makes weird movies. And I think he is the type of director who doesn't mind the fact that some people might hate it. He just makes what he thinks what he wants to make. But I don't walk out of movies, and I didn't walk out of this one. But it's the first time in quite a few years where I was sitting in the cinema and I was very, very tempted. And I was sitting there at some point being like, this is actually frustrating me to the point where I'm just angry at the fact that I'm wasting a Saturday evening. I'm watching something where literally nothing's happening. I was just so bored the whole time.
Can I just ask a question? Did you know the story, though? Did you know that the commandant and his family were living opposite the camp and picnicking and partying while the horror was unfolding in the camp? Did you know about that? Just generally asking, yeah.
The thing is, I understand from like an academic point of view what he was doing, and I understand the idea of the horror is how calm and normal everything's meant to look when such tragedies are going on next door. I understand what he was going for. It's just not the type of thing. It's the subtlety of the occasional scream or the occasional smoke. Give me the boy in striped pajamas. Give me these films that will look into the actual horrors and atrocities and hit that on an emotional level for me. I thought the coldness that you speak about, the characters, I just felt the film as a whole was just very cold because I didn't care about them, obviously, and they didn't give us anyone to care about. So we're just watching people living ordinary lives, doing nothing interesting. And that just really frustrated me so much. And so I was massively disappointed.
Last week I was promoting that other podcast. There are other movie podcasts called Countdown to the BAFTAs with Alex Zane. And one of them, I don't know whether you had a chance to listen to them, but one of them is on the Zone of Interest with the producer. And one of the things that struck me was there was a lot of talk about, we need to get the location, and they couldn't get the actual house, but they had one just down the road.
I noticed it wasn't the actual house.
And we need to get the mood, and we need to decide how we're going to set this, and are we actually going to call it Auschwitz as opposed to the unnamed concentration camp in the book, etc., etc. But very late in that kind of discussion, they said, and we need to work out what the story's going to be. So it did strike me that said this is a mood piece, and the story is something of an afterthought that has been paintbrushed on. This is me without having seen the film. It's just my impression from that description of the film given by the producers. So I guess again, it's I'm curious to know what I'm going to feel when I go and watch this. I mean, it is one of the 10 Oscar-nominated films, so must be a lot of people who think an awful lot of it in the business. So we will see. I suspect the scores are going to be quite varied here. This could be one for the end of the year statistics. Andy, what did you give Zone of Interest?
Simply because I think it's such an important film, and I think such a fresh take on Auschwitz, giving us the other side of the story. I genuinely thought it was an important film. I gave it a 9.
9 out of 10.
Yeah.
Scott?
This is going to be a 2 out of 10 movie.
Wow. Okay.
It is a diverse score.
Very diverse.
That is
Wow.
a Flickering Dreams score.
Is that the most diverse we've ever had?
I think it's getting there. Yes, I think it's getting there. That's a Flickering Dreams score of 5.5, making Jonathan Glazer's Zone of Interest a miss from the team of 2. Maybe if Emma and I see it, we will revisit this in a later week. Zone of Interest.
Sadly, neither of my local cinemas are showing it. Well, I say
such a shame.
none of my local Cineworlds are showing it this week.
Are they not?
Actually, mine aren't either, so
Oh, okay.
I'm glad I saw the limited screening.
Cineworld.
Well, sort of.
Yeah. Cineworld here is. Yeah.
Every man is showing it, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so I thought that might be a little bit contentious. That's the end of the films we're reviewing this week. We've got
Just
some
to say the subject isn't contentious. We're both agreed on the
the
horror.
Oh,
subject-
absolutely. Yeah.
subject is definitely
that.
not
It's the film
contentious.
itself
Just the
as a
style.
Yes.
film. Yeah,
I've never been to Auschwitz or indeed any of the concentration camps. I have been to the killing fields in Cambodia, and that was a very similar kind of
Experience,
somber
yeah.
experience.